I remember the first night, something moved in the mountains. Not a vehicle, not artillery, not anything human. At the time, I told myself it was just distance playing tricks on my eyes. But that lie only worked for a few minutes, because mountains don't move, and whatever I saw that night was taller than the mountains. I had been in Iran for 23 days when it happened. Not that anyone was counting out loud. Nobody liked to say the number of days out here. Time in a war zone stretches in strange ways. Some nights feel like entire months. Other weeks disappear without leaving much of a memory behind. But I remember that night clearly. Maybe because it was the first time the desert stopped feeling like empty land and started feeling like something that was watching us. I was 20 when the draft notice came. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in a white envelope that looked far too ordinary for the kind of message inside it. My mom had placed it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee machine, like it was a utility bill. I remember staring at my name printed across the front and feeling this strange numbness creep up the back of my neck. The war with Iran had been escalating for months by then. News channels ran footage of missile strikes and burning oil fields 24 hours a day. Politicians talked about deterrence and retaliation and strategic operations. But up until that envelope showed up, it still felt like something happening somewhere far away. Something on television. Something happening to other people. Not me. Not a kid from a quiet town in Ohio who had never been farther from home than Chicago. But the letter said otherwise. Report for induction. Mandatory. No alternatives. I remember my mom sitting across from me at the table while I read it. Her hands were folded together so tightly that the knuckles had turned pale. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Eventually, she said very quietly, "You'll come back. Not if, just you will." I nodded like I believed her. But even then, something inside me already knew that whatever came back probably wouldn't be the same person who left. Training happened fast, too fast. 3 months of shouting instructors, sleepless nights, and endless drills until the days blurred together. They shaved our heads, issued us rifles, taught us how to clear buildings, and identify distant silhouettes in desert terrain. They tried to turn us into soldiers before we had time to think about what that meant. Some guys handled it well, others didn't. You could usually tell who had grown up expecting to join the military and who had been pulled into it suddenly by the draft. The second group moved differently, quieter, like we were still trying to understand how our lives had changed so completely. I met Rodriguez during week 2 of training. He had this way of laughing at things that weren't really funny, not because he thought they were jokes, but because the alternative was sitting in silence, thinking about the situation we were all in. "Relax," he told me once during weapons maintenance. "If the war doesn't kill us, the heat probably will." I wasn't sure if that was supposed to make me feel better. Iran looked different than I expected. The news always showed cities and missile strikes, but the place we were deployed to was mostly desert and mountains, endless brown land stretching beneath a sky so wide it made you feel small, just looking at it. Our forward base sat in a shallow valley surrounded by rocky ridges that rose like dark teeth against the horizon. At night, the wind moved through those mountains with a low, hollow sound. Sometimes it almost sounded like distant voices. Generators hummed constantly behind the rows of tents and temporary structures. The smell of diesel hung in the air, mixing with dust and the faint metallic scent of weapons oil. The trenches had been dug quickly when our unit arrived, long, shallow lines carved into the earth with sandbags stacked along the edges. They weren't comfortable, but they gave us somewhere to crouch when artillery warnings came over the radio. Most nights were quiet, too quiet. War isn't constant explosions like movies show. Most of the time it's waiting in the dark, listening, your rifle resting across your knees while the minutes stretch out slowly. You start noticing things during those long hours. The way the wind shifts direction around midnight. The way the stars look different in this part of the world. And sometimes shapes moving in the mountains. The first time I noticed something strange was during a patrol. Rodriguez and I were walking the perimeter just after sunset. The sky still held that dim orange glow near the horizon, but most of the desert had already sunk into shadow. Our boots crunched softly over gravel as we moved along the outer fence line. The mountains to the north looked like black silhouettes. Ever feel like we're being watched? Rodriguez said suddenly. I glanced over at him. By who? He shrugged. The mountains. I laughed a little, mostly because the idea sounded ridiculous. But later that night, I caught myself staring at those same ridges longer than usual, and for a moment, I could have sworn one of them had shifted slightly. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. The desert does that sometimes. Things got stranger after that. Small things at first. Radios picking up brief bursts of static, even when the frequencies were clear. Guard towers reporting movement on the distant hillsides that disappeared when anyone tried to confirm it. Footsteps. That was the one that bothered me most. Some nights when the wind died down, you could hear something moving far beyond the perimeter. Slow, heavy. Not like vehicles. Not like people either. More like distant impacts. Soft but enormous, as if something massive was walking somewhere far out in the desert. The officers told us it was probably seismic activity, minor ground shifts in the mountains. Nobody argued with them out loud, but I started noticing the way the ground sometimes trembled very slightly beneath my boots during those sounds. And seismic activity doesn't move in steady steps. 3 weeks after we arrived, someone claimed they saw a figure on the ridge, Private Halverson from the Night Watch. He said it was standing between two rock formations, almost a mile away. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, until it moved. Too big, he kept repeating when they brought him into the command tent. Way too big. The officers assumed he'd fallen asleep on duty and dreamed something. Lack of sleep does strange things to your mind out here. But 2 nights later, I saw it too. I was on guard duty near the northern trench. The generator noise from the base hummed softly behind me, while the desert stretched out in front of my position like a dark ocean. The sky was clear, stars everywhere. So many that the whole world seemed illuminated by their faint silver light. For a long time, nothing happened. Just wind. Just silence. Then the ground trembled. Very faint. So faint, I thought maybe I imagined it. Then it happened again. I raised my binoculars toward the ridgeline, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain refused to understand what my eyes were showing me. A shape was rising behind the mountains. Not quickly, slowly. like something standing up after lying down for a very long time. The figure was enormous. Even from that distance, I could see its shoulders clearing the highest ridge. Its outline moved against the stars. A massive, humanoid silhouette. Too tall, too wide, impossible. My heart started pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. For several seconds, I just stood there, staring, waiting for the shape to dissolve into shadow or fog or some trick of perspective. But it didn't disappear. It took one step. The ground beneath my boots vibrated again, then another. Each step slow, heavy, deliberate, like the movement of something ancient. I felt suddenly deeply aware of how small we were. Our base, our trenches, our rifles, all of it felt meaningless compared to the size of the thing moving through the desert. The radio crackled beside me. "North Trench. Report." My voice shook. "I think there's something out here." "Define something." I looked through the binoculars again. The figure had stopped, standing motionless in the desert, watching, and then it began walking toward us. The next 30 minutes felt unreal. Sirens eventually began wailing across the base. Floodlights snapped on. Soldiers rushed from tents grabbing rifles, shouting to each other. Rodriguez appeared beside me in the trench. "What the hell is going on?" I pointed toward the desert. At first he saw nothing. Then the ground trembled again. A massive dark shape slowly emerged into the reach of the floodlights. Rodriguez stopped breathing. "Oh my God!" The giant stepped forward, and for the first time we saw it clearly. It was taller than the radio tower, easily 200 feet. Its body looked almost human in shape, but stretched, elongated, wrong. Its skin like stone or dried earth. The head alone the size of a house. Long arms hanging at its sides. Fingers thicker than tree trunks. It moved slowly, like something waking from a sleep that had lasted centuries. Every step made the ground shake. Artillery teams began firing. Shells streaked through the night sky and exploded against its chest. The flashes briefly illuminated its face, and I saw its eyes open. Two enormous black shapes in its skull, looking down at us. Not angry, not surprised, just aware. The giant kept walking. Bullets rattled against its legs like rain hitting a wall. Missiles struck its shoulders. Dust and rock burst from its body. But it didn't stop. It reached the outer perimeter fence and simply stepped over it. Towers fired non-stop. Machine guns roared. Then the giant reached down, and with one slow movement, it grabbed Private Halverson, lifted him up to eye level, and before anyone could react, swallowed him whole, his screams echoing for a brief moment before silence. The rest of us froze in terror. Then its hand descended on the trenches. Sandbags exploded. Earth collapsed inward. Men disappeared beneath its fingers like insects. Gunfire echoed everywhere. Screaming, radios shouting overlapping commands, but none of it mattered because the giant was already stepping deeper into the base. Vehicles were crushed beneath its feet. The generator station collapsed under one swing of its arm. Darkness spread as the lights died. I crawled through the trench, half blind, ears ringing from explosions. The ground shook again. Another building collapsed. Then another. Within minutes, the entire base was gone, flattened, destroyed. The giant stood in the center of it all, breathing slowly, looking down at the ruins. Then it turned and walked back toward the mountains, step by step, until the darkness swallowed it again. By the time rescue helicopters arrived the next morning, I was the only one left alive. Sometimes they ask me what it looked like. They want details, measurements, proof. But there's one thing I always tell them. The war didn't wake that thing. We did. And somewhere out there in those mountains, I think there are more of them.